What's up? Farid here on The Rational Farid. Today we are putting a foundational text of Christianity under the microscope, the Book of Acts. You know, the action packed sequel to the Gospels that tells the story of how the church began. But what if I told you it's not history? What if the book that bridges the gap between Jesus and the church is, to put it bluntly, fake history? Now, before you think that's just my hot take, you need to know this isn't just an opinion. It's a conclusion supported by a massive consensus of mainstream credentialed scholars who have studied this text inside and out. So, if you're ready to see the evidence for why Acts is more of a religious adventure novel than a historical document, stick around. You won't look at it the same way again. So, fake history is a heavy charge. And you're right to ask, okay, Farid, where's the evidence? Well, the first and most powerful piece of evidence doesn't come from me. It comes from an organization you absolutely need to know about, the Vestar Institute. We're not talking about a couple of rogue academics in a basement. This is a highly respected, peer reviewed body of credentialed experts who launched a massive project, the ACT Seminar. They spent 10 years, a full decade, putting every line of this book under the historical microscope. After all that work, what was the official verdict? First, they concluded that Acts was not written in the first century. It was written late in the early second century, probably between 115 and 125 CE. Think about what that means. It's not an eyewitness account. It's not even a report from someone who knew the eyewitnesses. It's a story being written generations after the fact. But here's the knockout blow. The scholars found that the Book of Acts doesn't fit the genre of history. Its primary genre is a religious adventure novel. It's crafted to push a specific theological and political agenda to present a clean, unified, and law abiding story of the early church. It's designed to inspire and persuade, not to accurately report what actually happened. This isn't just a different interpretation, it's a fundamental mainstream shift in understanding the very nature of this book. Now, at this point, I know the number one objection many believers will have. They'll say, but Farid, what about the very beginning, the preface? The author literally says he carefully investigated everything from the beginning, based on eyewitnesses, to write an orderly account. And you know what? They're right. That is what it says. But here is the critical flaw in that argument. The preface is a costume, it's a facade. As New Testament historian Dr. Richard Carrier has shown, while the preface mimics the style of Greco-Roman histories, it conspicuously leaves out everything that actually matters. Let's run a quick check. What do real historians of the era do? First, they identify themselves. They say who they are. Does the author of Acts do this? Nope. He's completely anonymous. Second, credible historians name their sources. Arian, in his History of Alexander the Great, tells us he is using the memoirs of Ptolemy and Aristobulus witnesses so we can judge his work. Does the author of Acts name a single eyewitness or written source for all of his spectacular claims? Not one. Third, historians explain their methodology. How did they sort fact from fiction? How did they verify conflicting reports? The author of Acts gives us nothing, just a vague assurance. So, when you strip it down, you have an anonymous author citing 0 named sources, giving no methodology for verification. That's not a preface to a history book. That's a marketing slogan designed to look historical without actually being historical. So, we have a late date and a fake preface. But this next point is the smoking gun. This is where we can catch the author of Acts red-handed, actively rewriting history to fit his agenda. How? By comparing Acts to our earliest, most authentic Christian sources, the letters of the Apostle Paul himself. The author of Acts clearly used Paul's letters as a source, but he didn't just retell the story. He changed it. Let's take the most explosive issue in the early church, bringing non-Jews, the Gentiles, into the movement. In Paul's own letters, like his letter to the Galatians, this is a messy, bitter, and intense conflict. Paul describes a public showdown in Antioch where he has to call out the Apostle Peter to his face for his hypocrisy on the issue. It was a struggle for the very soul of the new movement. Now, look at the story told in the book of Acts. That messy, inconvenient conflict is gone, completely erased. Instead, Acts invents a new narrative where Peter, before Paul's mission even gets going, receives a convenient vision from God telling him it's okay to accept Gentiles. The whole affair becomes a smooth, top down, divinely approved process with perfect unity. Paul's struggle is written out of his own story. Let's be crystal clear. This isn't a simple mistake or a different perspective. This is a deliberate, calculated rewrite of the past. It's historical revisionism, plain and simple, designed to create a fictionalized portrait of church unity that never actually existed. Okay, so at this point, an apologist will play what they think is their trump card. They'll say, but Farid, Acts gets so many specific details right. The titles of local magistrates, the names of ports, the geography, it's filled with accurate trivia. It has to be a reliable history. This is an argument I call the trivia trap, and it's a classic logical red herring. Let me ask you this. If you read a Tom Clancy novel and it perfectly describes the layout of the Pentagon and uses correct military ranks, does that mean the fictional terrorist plot inside the book actually happened? Of course not. Sprinkling in real-world details is just what good fiction writers do to create a believable setting. The author of Acts was an educated man who likely had access to itineraries, maps, and handbooks, the ancient equivalent of Wikipedia. Getting the name of a governor right proves nothing about the truth of the supernatural events in the story. In fact, we can prove the author was just lifting details from other sources and not very carefully. We know he used the works of the famous first century historian Josephus, and he got it wrong. In Acts 21, the author has Paul being mistaken for a rebel leader known as the Egyptian, who supposedly led 4,000 Sicarii or dagger-wielding assassins into the wilderness. But if you actually read Josephus, these were two completely different rebel movements. The Egyptian was a messianic figure. The Sicarii were a separate group of political assassins. The author of Acts has carelessly smashed two different stories from his source material together. That isn't meticulous research. That is a novelist sloppily borrowing details to create a veneer of historical reality for a story whose actual claims, the miracles, and Christian events remain completely uncorroborated. So, let's put the pieces together. If Acts has a late date, an anonymous author, a hollow preface, deliberate contradictions, and sloppy research, what in the world is it? It's exactly what the scholars at the Vestar Institute concluded. It's not a history monograph. It's a religious adventure novel. And once you see it that way, the entire book suddenly makes perfect sense. It is absolutely stuffed with the standard sensationalist tropes of popular fiction from that period. Think about it. You have pervasive, over-the-top miracles on every page, thrilling captivities and magical, last-second jailbreaks by angels, a dramatic shipwreck leading to an encounter with the superstitious natives of Malta, and a venomous snake. You have constant divine interventions, visions, and prophecies driving the plot forward. You even have character parallels, where the lives of Peter and Paul are written to magically mirror each other, and even Jesus. Now, contrast that with how a real historian from the period like Tacitus would write. When Tacitus mentions rumors of miracles, he's skeptical. He'll distance himself by saying it is reported, or so the story goes, often offering rational explanations. The author of Acts does the exact opposite. He presents the most fantastical events, people rising from the dead, men teleporting a straightforward, undeniable fact. This isn't the cautious voice of a historian. It is the breathless voice of a fiction writer, crafting an exciting narrative to promote his faith. It's ancient fan fiction, not history. So, when you put it all together, the late 2nd century dating, the deliberate contradictions with Paul's own letters, the sloppy use of sources, and the clear fictional tropes, The evidence overwhelmingly points to one conclusion. The Book of Acts is best understood as a piece of propagandistic historical fiction. It wasn't written to record what actually happened, it was written to sell a particular version of Christianity, a sanitized, unified myth for a growing church. But that's my analysis based on the evidence. What are your thoughts? Does this change how you look at the foundations of the church? Drop your take in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious to read them. If you found this breakdown insightful, do me a solid and hit that like button. And if you want to keep digging into history, faith, and reason, make sure you subscribe to The Rational Farid and ring that bell so you never miss a video. Until next time, stay rational.